right, so first here we have Eva's image, and it sounded like you were nervous about this, but that you got out there and you found someone that was already being photographed with an iPhone, and then you jumped in and asked if you could take pictures. And I think that's a great approach here. Finding someone that you know is not going to say that you can't take their picture. And it is scary, like approaching strangers, even if they say no, for some reason that feels personal sometimes. So I think you did a really nice job, not just finding this person that has a unique look to them as they're dressed for the holidays and dressed to show off these products that they're making, but you also found really nice light for your subject. You didn't move them into a shaded area where we're not getting any light or have really bright light on your subject. You have really beautiful light on your subject as it comes across the side of their face and highlights their cheeks, nose. We have a little highlight on the forehead and chin. Really brings out her features, and I think that's great. You're at ISO 400, 46 millimeters, so a little bit on the wider side. In general, I would encourage you to shoot with a little bit of a longer lens when you're doing your portrait photography. F4.5 at 1/60th of a second, so the rest of those settings look good. That 46 millimeters, I think I've said this plenty of times, but just to make sure it's clear, the wider angle lens is like expanding space. And we don't really want that when we're photographing people. We don't want like her chin to look like it's long and that her eyes are really receded. We want to kind of compress that a little bit. So shooting with a little bit of a longer lens, not a really long lens, but say like 85 millimeters, generally works better. And then another thing I think you could have done here to just make this feel not as static or posed would be just to pull her off a little bit from the background. If you gave her a couple of feet between herself and the background, then the background would start to fall out of focus at f4.5, and that distance would feel like not as tense. There wouldn't be this I don't know, pushing together of things in the scene. It would allow for that background to feel more natural and not as though she was just pushed up against the background. But working with a stranger, your focus is great, your exposure looks good, the light that you're using works really well. Her character comes through in this. She looks very comfortable with you photographing her. I'm only going to critique one image. If you are asked to turn in one image, I'm always going to critique the first image. So I'm just looking at this one here. But it looks like you took some images that will work great for her Etsy shot, with the earrings getting close in there, showing a bit of her face here getting in. So these feel like product shots. This is really comfortable as well and has that distance from the background that I think works better, as do some of these images. So just creating a little bit more distance, having her close to something feels kind of amateur-y to me compared to what we have in this that feels much more natural. This image that we have is by Andres. You're at ISO 125, 35 millimeters, f3.5 at 1/250th of a second. So those settings all look good. Shooting with 35 millimeters, and we can kind of see that bend of the frame as this is starting to look like it's leaning back a little bit, right? So again, shooting with a little bit of a longer lens is going to work better. You also have really nice lighting that you're working with on your subject. This open shade, not hard shadows, but still creating dimension with your subject. We don't want soft light that just flattens out our subject. We want there to be some dimension. So we still have a highlight side as light's coming down, and then a more shadowed side. So it's creating great dimension. So this is a new friend of yours, and he looks very comfortable in front of the camera. The blue bike matching the blue house, I think works well. And you had said that he does architecture. And I think that can be like understood with this as we see him with the bike and just the mechanics of this very simple track bike, and then looking at the build of that and the color of that against the house. I think the structure of all of that lends itself to the idea that he is interested in shape and build and whatnot. So I actually think that works really well. Moving your subject and not having them totally centered, I think would work better here. When you have your subject centered, if you're really close, I think that can work well. But when there's objects around him and he's in the center, it feels more static. Let's look at your contact sheet and see if there's anything else on here. Yeah, so for all of them, you're erring on the side of having him in the center of the frame. So that's what I would just challenge you to as you move forward this semester, is how you can move your subject in the frame. Having him with the bike straight in front of him and having that as more of a symmetrical framing, that works. I would crop in a little bit. That works okay. But yeah, just continue to move around and seeing different ways that you can format your image to have your subject not quite in the center of the frame. But the lighting's looking good here, the settings are looking good, and I feel like the image is really visually cohesive with that bike kind of pulling everything together. And then this last image is by Lauren, and so this is a friend of your roommate. I think that's what you had said. And you have a business where you're photographing seniors. So you're used to this, like, let's go out to a location, let's photograph. But that's when there's a certain goal in mind, right? You have a paying customer and they're expecting these 10 shots or whatever. If you're taking someone out and you're photographing them in a new atmosphere that you haven't probably gone out and scouted the location, and you're not sure what the intent of your images are, I could see how that could be a bit challenging. So you have the subject in front of a house. I do agree that that window is a little bit like, what's going on there? Having it boarded up but painted as though it's real. But the setting in general has this nice like rustic feel to it. The idea of the picket fence being representative of her future and what she's looking for, I think that's an interesting play there. The number one thing that you're working well in this image with is the light, and I think we've seen that throughout the semester. You were waiting until it was evening. There's this golden hue to the light that's coming across her face. I'd probably bring a reflector in to open up a little bit more of this side of her face and get some light in her eyes. I think that would open this up a little bit, but the quality of light that's coming across her face is just beautiful. It has this nice pop that really makes her stand out from the background. And I think I talk about that with a lot of students, that we want our subject to feel separate from the background. And you can make the shape of them more apparent by the light that you're using. So this is a great example of that. I would probably in this image also say to pull her a little bit more in front of the background. Maybe like 2 or 3 steps forward just to create a little bit more separation. But let's look at your settings, f4, 1/60th of a second, so that all works well. And here you have your subject centered. And I just said that a subject being centered can be really static. But when you're closer, as you are here, it doesn't feel like she's surrounded by the frame in such a way. It doesn't feel as static as we saw in that last image. So I think you can center your subject. I think there can be success in that. But we need to be moving the subject around and trying it out and making sure that's the most productive way to photograph them. And we can see here that you did. You have a lot of comfortable shots with her. She's moving around and smiling and laughing at you, with you. I think you picked probably the best background out of all of these. So this is working really well also. It feels much more formal than what you submitted. But this is really beautiful. And again, having her turn towards that beautiful light there is working nicely. Here's another image where she's centered, but I think, wow, that's a reflection in a window. I think that we're seeing that's nice. She's centered, but she's taking up enough of the frame that it makes sense. But you can see the difference in the lighting here compared to the lighting here, or the image that you turned in. Definitely having that more direct light, and then it looks like you're working in post-production to enhance that is working out best. Nice job on this.